You are about to see old 16mm films of New Brunswick, Canada, taken rather haphazardly, I fear, by my mother and father, Kate and Dunham Barney, and myself. They have been copied onto digital videotape by my son, James King, and they cover the first 7 years that my sister Kitsy and I went to Nictau. I am Harriet Barney Lidgerwood. Jamie and I have had a lot of fun doing this project. It all started in 1924, when our mother and father spent their honeymoon, 6 weeks no less, on or near Nictau Lake, which at the time consisted of a few rustic cabins, an outhouse, and lots of black flies. Learning to make a smudge pot, a smoky fire in a bucket, to discourage the flies, was a must for survival. The following year, I believe, they formed the Nictau Fish and Game Club, along with Bert Moore, a well-known New Brunswick woodsman and guide who became the club manager. They even ventured to have a club button created. I don't recall anyone ever actually wearing the button, however. Mother and Dad spent a few weeks there every year, and in 1936, my sister Kitsy, age 6, and I, age 11, were taken along and were included every summer thereafter. Over the years, more cabins were built, some for the club and some for members' private use. Members came from both the United States and Canada, and I doubt that there were ever more than 15 member families. The camp buildings belonged to the club, but the land belonged to the Canadian government, from which fishing and hunting rights were leased. Here's a road map that shows a part of northeastern Maine, the yellow section on the left, and New Brunswick, Canada. The small green rectangular area is Mount Carleton Provincial Park, which is at the center of the area leased during the club era. In the early days, we took an overnight sleeper train from Boston to Presque Isle, Maine, drove for 4 hours to a boarding house called Miller's near Plaster Rock, New Brunswick. From there we were poled in canoes for 40 miles up the Little Tobique River to the main camp at Nictau Lake. The entire trip from Farmington took at least 3 days. This shows the leased area, which covered about 800 square miles, including sections of 2 rivers, the Little Tobique and the Nepisiguit, also 2 lakes, Nictau and Bathurst, which were connected by a 3-mile carry. The pink markers show Miller's and 3 camps on the Little Tobique, where you could spend the night. The yellow markers show the club camps on Nictau and Bathurst lakes. There's also a pink marker showing Governor's Pool, one of the best trout fishing spots down the Nepisiguit River. Ben Garfield sent me a tourist map of Mount Carleton Provincial Park. It's about the same scale as the blue map, so we superimposed it. It gives a flavor of how the area is used today and shows modern roads providing easier access than in the club years. In 1936, however, everyone had a guide with a 20-foot canoe. The guides were a special group of human beings. English and Irish stock, they were full of good humor. In addition to their guiding duties, such as paddling or poling their sport to the best fishing spots, they sang old ballads, played cribbage and cutthroat bridge with gusto, competed at horseshoes, and even made our beds, sometimes the pied variety. Mostly they made Kitsy and me laugh. Looking forward to seeing my guide again kept me going all year. In those years, one of our main concerns was who could catch the biggest fish. But it was an era of conflict, and Nictau offered a brief respite. Despite their age, these films have held up quite well, and we edited out very little. The starting year is 1936. I'll try to identify people and places as we go along.
Here Kitsy and I have arrived at Miller's boarding house and are playing with a pet deer that they had that year. We are still in our city clothes, as you can see, so we must have just arrived. And here is Mrs. Miller trying to get rid of the deer, which is proving a nuisance to her. And here's Kitsy out on the river, finally all dressed to go and practicing her casting. She was quite a fisherman, I'll tell you, her first year there. And here we're having lunch on the river on the way up. We always toasted bread for lunch. And there is our Mademoiselle named Marie Theresa Bonfelt. And here's Kitsy holding her big catch. She caught the most fish of anyone that year in that time. Whoops. And here is an animal swimming, across the lake. He is, you will see, I believe, a porcupine. There was quite a bit of wildlife there the first years we went up. We saw deer and beaver, and there is John Russell. Johnny was the son of old friends of Mother and Dad's, the Pat and Lucille Russell. There's Charlie Banks. He was the chef, and later even became the chef down at Pine Island, which was the family's hunting place in North Carolina. And here we've got a shot of the river. I believe it's either the river or the end of the lake, and I'm not sure which, because that looks like the dam. And here is Granny, my mother, walking in the woods, tightly clutching her flit can, which we often traveled with when we were out in the woods. That was the modern way of keeping the black flies off for us. And there is Dr. John Davies with a little mustache. I'll talk to you about him later. And here is John Russell again, casting for his first salmon. He was an avid fisherman. His mother said he fished in every puddle that they came to. And there he is with his first salmon. You will see later on this picture again, as there was more than one movie camera this first year. And some was with colored film and some was with black and white. So there are some repeats. That's George Ferris, his guide. They were quite a team. We had a great trip. And here we are coming into the camps at Nictau Lake. These are the club camps. And that is Kitsy. And we're jumping around like mad because here we are now taking canoes across the carry to Bathurst Lake, where we must have been going for a visit. There were club camps there as well. And you have to walk 3 miles to get there. And there is a bridge the guides had to remake many years because of the beaver dams in that area going to Bathurst. I think that's trying to cut down logs in the beaver dam. And here is Dunham fishing, I believe, in Bathurst Lake. His guide was Phil Howard. Phil Howard went up with them on their honeymoon as their guide when he was only 18, I believe. And he went every year afterwards, though his winter job was working on the railroads. This is an old loggers camp down the Nepisiguit River. Mostly we spent our nights in tents down there, and I believe in this year only the men went. Here's Gordon Black, who was usually Mother's guide, but he was on that trip for some reason. And here is Phil Howard, and I believe this was Seal, the man they often took to cook for trips downriver. There's an extra pair of hands. The Nepisiguit was a lovely little river. It didn't have any salmon, it just had large trout. And the trout were between 2 pounds and the largest I ever heard of was 7 pounds. But you tried to catch at least a 4-pounder. And as you'll see, they had pretty good luck down there. There was a pool, a special pool down there called Governor's Pool, and this may be it. This is Ken Everett on a, well, I don't know if it's Ken. Anyway, that we know and recognize is Dunham Barney, our father. And this guide, Phil. Most of the time we fish from the canoes. There's Mother with a big trout. I guess she went down on this trip.
That was just trout.
Mm-hmm. There they are having a picnic. Still down in Nepisiguit, I believe. And fording the river. One thing about New Brunswick in those days, you could always drink from the rivers and brooks without feeling like you were going to be poisoned. There's a nice big one. That's a big trout, probably about a 3-pounder. I can't see who that is. I believe that might be Dr. Bunnell. Nictau was so far away from doctors that my family often asked their doctor friends to come along. And both Dr. Bunnell and Dr. Davies were Farmington doctors at that time, though Dr. Davies ended up in Boston. Oh, here we are at what we call Guides Day, or Games Day, and there they are having what you call a thread and needle race. One holds a thread and one holds a needle. And see who can do it first. Here's a little horseplay out in the lake. Somebody got upset, I guess. And there's Phil Howard coming down the flagpole. He's the only man I ever knew that could climb the flagpole with just his sneakers on. And this is log rolling. That I think is a sport that especially the lumbermen have. And our guides, of course, did some lumbering, I'm sure, in the winters. But they were just fooling around that day. We'll get to see more of the games, the guide games, a little later on another camera. And that's Janie Russell, Johnny's sister, who was a great pal of mine, and I'm behind her in that boat.
Outboard motor.
Well, we didn't have it's an outboard motor that we used on occasion when you had a long way to go and not much time to do it. But there was only one, and it was always breaking down. We were probably either going on a picnic or I think we're on our way home. They probably took us to the end of Big Nictau, which was 4 miles long, and it gave the guides quite a boost on their trip downriver so that they could make the 16 miles to the halfway camp easily. The river had 2 camps. In fact, it had 3 camps going downriver, so that you had a choice of where you might spend the night, and they were sort of evenly spaced. The northern one was Lawson's, and the middle one was the bungalow or halfway camp, and the one nearest Miller's was Wolverton. We spent nights in all of them at different times, and sometimes we even tented on the river, on the on one of the sandbars like here. But this is a bunch of loggers on the river that we bumped into on our way out. They were getting ready for the winter run of logs and things.
This is Nepisiguit.
No, this would be the Tobique coming back down to Miller's. And this is Miller's. See, it was a big farmhouse where they had bedrooms. And now we seem to have changed over to the color film for the same year, 1936. And there's Pa with a salmon that he's caught on the river going up. So we're kind of back at the beginning. And here he is, of course, having a picnic lunch on the river. And there's his guide, Phil Howard, taking his chances. And there's Johnny Russell with his guide. And here comes Janie Russell and me in a canoe pulled by Jack McCarty. It's too bad the color is faded, so I remember these pictures as being very good when they first came out. for color. There's Phil. And here we are at the halfway camp on the way up the river. And there is a deer that seems quite tame. We used to spend the nights at one of the camps on the river, usually. There were 3 of them spread out. And here we are up on the Nictau Lake. And with so many in the boat, I know that we're off on an excursion, probably to have a picnic. And here's Kitsy eating something. Maybe we went off to pick blueberries. I don't know. Looks like she's eating. And there she is, the famous paddler. And here we probably are going down river on the Nepisiguit. Because that's where they went that year. And I think Mother and Dad and the men on the trip went down. To catch trout. And we've been through this already. On the black and white film. And there's Dr. Davies with his big trout catch. And here we are back at Bathurst Lake. Catching trout at the mouth of a brook where they were very plentiful some days. Some days you could just hold your fly above the water and the fish would jump right up to it. I believe that's me. These were very small fish because they were just brook trout. Here's Dr. Davies trying to prove that you could catch them by holding your fly above the water. And there is Mademoiselle, known as Mitzi, and Kitsy, and Ned McAloon, who is her guide. And Janie Russell, trying to figure out how to fish. And now we seem to be going down river again, and I'm not sure which river. And here is Mademoiselle trying to get the knack of poling, and I guess maybe this was Guide's rest hour or something, and all the sports are trying to pole. And here is poor Phil Howard, worried to death that one of these flies are going to catch him, with Dad and Kitsy fishing from the same boat, which wasn't done very often. And here we are back to Johnny Russell catching a salmon, and I believe it's the same time as on the black and white film, but it is a pretty shot. And here's a deer swimming across the river. You'll notice all the what looks like dead sticks around, but that was all due to a forest fire a few years before that had really devastated parts of the area. And by the time we went back years later, it was much overgrown and with greenery. And here we are back at the guides' games day. And this is a sack race. All of them are guides in it. And there's Mademoiselle laughing at Gordon. And here was the fisherman's race to see what teams could go out and catch a fish first. And here they come back in. The winning catch, I believe. They came in empty-handed, and somebody got a fly in their pants, and here was the booby prize. Bert Moore and George Ferris. And here we are back having a thread and needle race, and a little bit of duplication there with the turned over canoe. And here was a race designed for some of the sports. I think this was a potato race. There's Kitsy competing with some young man that I can't remember the name of. Mademoiselle having a smoke with the guides, and Mademoiselle with her big catch. She got one of the biggest fish in the lake. This was a lake catch. And here we are back where the fish were really jumping. We had a homemade raft that the guides made for us in big Nictau Lake, just around the corner from the home camps, where on the hot days we'd go swimming. Though there weren't so very many of those, it was sort of a major excursion when we went out to the raft. I'm afraid that's me. And here we have a famous skit called Little Black Sambo and the Tiger. Hey, did you note the name on the bow of the Barney canoe? Named for their firstborn? Conceived at Nictau. Little Black Sambo, I will eat you up if you don't give me your beautiful red umbrella. So then the tiger got the umbrella, and Sambo was saved. And here we are going, I don't know where. Early morning, I believe, on the river. And here's the family's old friends, the Baldwins. This is now 1937. And the Baldwins and the Barclay Robinsons, that's he playing horseshoes. And Mrs. Baldwin there. Came that year. Horseshoes is one of the favorite games the guides used to play. Everybody's getting ready to go swimming, I believe, out on the raft. There's Mother going down that treacherous ladder. And Mrs. Robinson and Barkley. And Phil Howard was the only guide that could swim. I think that's Mademoiselle. Peggy Robinson. There's our Kitsy. And there we are, all off on some kind of an excursion. I guess over to Bathurst, because here we are on the carry. There's me, there's Mother, Sherman Baldwin, Peggy Robinson, Barkley Robinson, and Harriet Baldwin. And there is the horse again pulling the canoes, or getting ready to. And here we are, I believe, on the dock at Bathurst. There were camps at Bathurst as well as at Nictau that belonged to the club. In fact, there were no private camps at Bathurst. Every year we spent a few nights over at Bathurst for the fishing, and always started trips down the Nepisiguit from there. And there's looking up towards the Bathurst camp. I think maybe we're getting ready there to go down the Nepisiguit, because here we are doing just that. And there's the whole group lining up for a photograph, no doubt. You'll see that I'm in that too, so maybe I did go on this Nepisiguit trip. This was the year that Peggy Robinson was ill, and they were afraid she had appendicitis. So they put her in a canoe with two of the guides and took her all the way out in about 24 hours. I don't believe she had appendicitis, as I remember. And here's Grandpa, of course, being funny. And here is Mother catching a trout down the Nepisiguit. And there's a deer, which you'll see jump in a minute. And here's the group again. And that is Mother in the front of the boat there. That was Barkley, that's Sherman Baldwin, that last person. And here's everybody going downriver, I guess. And here we are back at Nictau Lake. And here is Mother trying to catch a salmon. In fact, she is catching a salmon. So we are back on the Tobique River, and this must be dawn on the Tobique River, starting out with the mist on the water. I remember that so well. We have to get an early start to get down to our next stop before dark. And there we are back in our street clothes down at Miller's, saying goodbye. Tearful goodbye with our guides. Dave Edwards looking at us. Here is Mademoiselle and me. Oh, and here, completely out of context, is Commander Longfellow, head of the International Red Cross, whose specialty was making bouillabaisse, which he insisted on cooking for Mother. She spent days collecting the 32 ingredients needed, and we were all made to eat it, taken in Farmington. And now we're back at Nictau. I believe the year is 1938. And that's Polly Rockefeller with Mother in a boat coming up the lake. Polly and Sterling or Rocky Rockefeller were friends of the families. I believe they had a camp on the Tobique River of their own. And here's Grandpappy back on the new improved truck that is getting the canoes across the Carry to Bathurst. He seemed to love his new vehicle. As usual, being the card. The deer at Bathurst were often quite tame. There's Mrs. Rockefeller again. And there's Mr. Rockefeller with her. And there's old Dave Edwards. I don't know what his name is, brother Ned, I believe. That's a good deer picture. Here's Mother catching a salmon. You can see him there in the water. At least I think it's a salmon. Yes, it is. Percy Sinnott in the background and Grandpappy catching a salmon. And that was Ned McCaskill. All guides. And here we are at the dock at, I guess, Nictau, because there's my old friend Foffy Frisbee, and there's Cynthia Lefferts and Kitsy. And that's looking out at Nictau Lake. And now we're going over to Bathurst, I guess. And that's Ken Everett's, my guide for many years. And there's Clara Shaw, who was Cynthia's sort of governess. Nobody ever used that word, though. And here's a little friendly horseshoe match. And this is all over at Bathurst. The other group of cabins that the club could use. That was Dr. Davies, sort of doctor in-house, taken on the trip. He used to love coming up there, so it was never a problem to get him to come. And there is Kitsy, eating something, I believe. And here they are going up the falls, which is the hardest part to get up the river.
Which river?
This is on the Tobique River, so this may be a different year already. I don't know. It reminds me of the long trips, long days it took to get up there. We used to wake up the morning we'd get into near Presque Isle on the sleeper, and there'd be a baked potato on your breakfast plate in the dining car on the sleeper, and we would have all just barely recovered from having whooped it up at the Ritz roof in Boston the night before, before taking the sleeper. And pretty soon after breakfast the train would leave us off at Presque Isle, and we'd travel on to Miller's by car. That's Dr. Bunnell, another of our famous in-house doctors. And so this must be now 1940, because there's Johnny Russell again, and the Russell's family, whom we were so close to in those days, often came with us. These are the camps at Bathurst. Dr. Bunnell showing his prize catch.
Is Dr. Bunnell the family doctor?
Yes, he was our family doctor in Farmington. He was sort of the new doctor in town back in those days. There he is catching a fish. This must be at Bathurst still. It looks like the Bathurst landscape, which got much more burned than Nictau in the forest fires. Here comes Janie Russell and Kitsy up the path to our cabin at Nictau. Little rough housing there.
Where did Janie Russell end up? Bermuda?
Well, yes, she finally left Farmington, and she married first a Bermudian, and now she's married to somebody that lives in Princeton. They live in Princeton. And those are the main camps at Nictau. And that is Pat Russell, who was a great photographer. And he took some of the nature pictures on this film. And that is the guides camp at Nictau. That was built a year or two after we got there, and was much improved over the old quarters. Many a cribbage game or cutthroat bridge went on in that building. And they had the only radio, so we used to go over there during the war and listen to Gabriel Heater give the news on the war. And that was Johnny Russell, and this is Aunt Lou Russell, laughing as she always was, a wonderful smile.
Johnny's sister?
Lucille was Johnny's mother.
Oh, okay. And Janie was the sister.
That is right. And here is a barge going up the Tobique River to bring supplies up to the camps, probably. And that's my guide, Ken Everett, And you're about to see the best nature shot I ever took, which is a moose with two calves. There it is. And there's one of the calves, and the other one's up in front of it. Can you see it? It didn't last long. We used to have to do summer projects at the Oxford School, and I took taking nature movies as my project one summer, and that was a fabulous luck I had of seeing a moose, because you didn't get that close to them very often. Here's either the same one or another barge coming up the river.
I guess the road wasn't too good if they took the river, huh?
Well, there were no roads in those days. You passed millers, you see. So the supplies came in on your own boats, or else they came in on those barges. And there I am, catching a salmon. And I don't know who's taking the picture. And there is his mother on the steps of our Barney camp, looking out at the lake. And there's, I think, Cynthia. It must have been Kitsy then, I don't know. That's me and Kitsy. That is me. And here we look like we're going over towards the beaver dam, but I don't know. Now we have, I think, a slightly new version of a transportation for the canoes. And these probably are some of the nature pictures that Pat Russell took that were really rather good.
Pat was a photographer?
Well, that was his hobby, photography, and we have wonderful family pictures that he took, both in Nictau and in, that is a bear. That's the only picture that we ever got. And I think Pat took it, but I'm not sure. Swimming across the lake.
He's a little jittery.
He's probably very excited.
Yeah. Maybe he's more of a still photographer.
Yes, he wasn't a movie man.
That's a nice one.
There's Cynthia Lefferts with her guide, Ned McCaskill, taking her rod apart, and that was, I guess, Jimmy the cook, the chef. At Bathurst we are. There's Cynthia and Kitsy and their guides, and Phil Howard. That is just a brook, but I can't see if there's something else we're supposed to see. There is Dunham with his pipe. And there is Pat Russell. And I believe we're at the dock at Nictau. There's Grandpappy poling. And another deer. And I fear that's me. And Percy playing, and I'm playing the recorder. And notice the feather in my hair, please. Mm. This is, I believe, 1940 still. That was Peter Hughes, as I saw a quick shot of. In the check shirt there. And me sitting on the ground in the background. And a lot of guides around, and Cynthia and Kitsy. And I'm not sure who the gentleman with the mustache is. Pat Russell and Lou Russell. And that's Polly Rockefeller, I think.
So Cynthia knew Rockefellers even when she was a kid.
Yeah, but she probably didn't know it.
Yeah.
I don't even know if they're related for sure. This is a shot that I believe I took on a trip Ken Everett and I took overland via Mount Carleton. And this is the fire tower on top of Mount Carleton. You can see how bare the landscape is. And there is the lake, and I think that might be Bathurst Lake there, though. I'm not sure. In a minute, I know that day we walked cross country. I think it was about an 18-mile trip. We ended up on Bald Mountain, looking down at Nictau Lake, and came down home that way. There's Ken. He was my guide in early years. And there's a view of Big Nictau Lake, and that white spot is Loon Rock, a famous rock that you should ask Kitsy and Y about. And here I am climbing the big rocks on top of Bald Mountain. And we're going to have a good view of where the two lakes join, right there at the Narrows. You see the club camps there on that little point? That's Little Nictau on the right, and Big Nictau would be to the left, and it was 4 miles down to the dam to get to the Tobique River. Our trout fishing was mostly done in Little Nictau, but Big Nictau was just there for boating. And now we're 1941, because here we have Hope Smith, my old friend and classmate from the Oxford School. And she and I went on a trip across country to a lumber camp where we spent the night, and we had 3 guides with us to take care of us. And I can't see what that is. Oh, yes. I haven't figured out what this is. It's either a muskrat. No, it's not a muskrat.
Raccoon?
It's sort of like a raccoon, or maybe it was a beaver, but I didn't think it had either a beaver tail or a muskrat. I mean, a raccoon markings. Here we're picking blueberries en route, and I guess we have to do a little poling to get there on a makeshift raft. This was an overnight trip. And here's an old rundown lumber camp that we spent the night in a tent. And the guide slept inside one of these cabins.
You guys are cooking, huh?
Oh, sure, they're cooking. They did about everything. That was a little bit, that was Percy, of course, pointing, being a character. And this is a little tent that Hope and I slept in, and it fell down on us in the night, and we could hear, we smelt a skunk go right by us, and we had a deer go snorting right over us. And that is a moose that had nothing to do with the other trip, I don't believe. We didn't get too many moose. close enough to photograph them. And as the years went by, seeing game got to be quite a rare event. And here's our dear Percy and Gordon playing the harmonica, and he was just great at dancing. We all tried to get Percy to teach us the Highland Scottish, which is what he was dancing here. And we took this movie in the hopes that we could practice at home, but none of us ever got very good at it. Here we are coming down that year, all in our city clothes. We'd probably spent the night up at the Tobique Club, which was probably a mile up the river from Miller's. And there's Grandpappy clowning it up for the camera again. And here we are in our street clothes, Kitsy, me, and Hope. And this seems to be a new year, 1942, with Pete and Mary Elizabeth Carey as our guests that year. There's Mary E. and Jack McCarty pumping up a tire for the old truck, the Bathurst truck. It seems to have advanced quite a bit by this time. A new model. Quite a change from the old days with the horses. The old Beaver Dam Road. I guess we're assembled now at the end of Bathurst Lake, getting ready to go up to the camps, which is about 3 miles up, I think. There's quite a little string of lakes over at Bathurst. There's Gordon. There's Pete Carey. Got a load of stuff in his canoe. We had to take quite a bit of food supplies over and so forth. There's Pete casting between the lakes and a little run there. In spite of being partially paralyzed on one side, Pete could do most everything.
How was he paralyzed?
He was paralyzed by a cyst growing on his spine when he was in his early teens, I believe. And there was nothing they could do about it in those days. Oh, and here we are down at the end of Nictau Lake, I think, for a picnic. And there's Mary E. throwing stones. And here's Grandpa in our old sponson canoe that had a sail. However, as probably the Garfields know, the Barneys weren't much on sailing. And there's Kitsy and Mary E. knitting on the porch. Me. And here we are, going back home again already. This was the first year of World War II, and our trip was rather brief, as I remember. It was also the year that we were able to go partway by the beginning of a road that the lumber company was putting in, and we traveled by wagons because it wasn't really good enough to travel with cars yet. The Fraser Lumber Company finished their roads 2 or 3 years after this, and we were able to drive all the way up to the Nictau camps by car. A far cry from the early days, and there is the road home.